Honest J. Nowak. Oh yeah. A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to Honest J. Nowak, Mark of the Line. And more importantly, I feel like that out of all car marks that I pretty much talked about, one in particular seems to have been left out. But don't worry, I'm getting to it. I've talked about many other well-known companies out there, like Ford, Porsche, BMW, Honda, Lincoln, and even McLaren, but if there's one American company out there that I might as well go on in to talk about after all this time of not doing so, let's go on ahead and find new roads with Chevrolet. Yeah, that's pretty much its slogan. I can't really be sure that they still have that around, but if they change that, I guess I'll find out. But in terms of how Chevrolet is handling at times like this, I'm glad to say that for something that's actually going to be 110 years old this year. Yeah, since Chevrolet was first established in 1911, it's safe to say that it's now going to be turning 110 years old. So you know what? The timing is perfect for me to go on ahead and bring about Chevrolet for a special episode of Honest J. Nowak. I've mentioned before that Studebaker will in fact be turning 159 years old, and Opel will be turning 169 years old, both of which will pretty much not meet their next level of 10s until 2022, but here in 2021, which I hate to say it, but we're still in this awful year, by all means. Chevrolet, though, is going to be turning 110 years old, so I can at least hope for a lot of good things that might happen in the future. But if only we didn't have to live through the rest of this entire year, then maybe I would have been a lot more excited about this big event here. Well, anyways, the big thing about Chevrolet is just, well, it is in fact one of the biggest in the world, one of the biggest in the industry. And there are a few others that happen to be much more successful in many ways, and also much more at it with the many things that they have been doing. But in terms of how Chevrolet's life has worked out so far, 110 years of impressive innovation and impressive history and backtracking by Gaston Chevrolet, it's safe to say that there are actually a lot of things out there that I might want to go ahead and talk about. Going all the way back to the 1920s and 1930s, Chevrolet has not necessarily been top of the line, but it was pretty much there with many for its time. And I'm going to say this again, the 1930s, a time where gangsters, dust bowls, and also not some good politics, kind of like what's going on today, was apparently a thing way back in that time. But let's just say for sure that Chevrolet was able to survive this thing. Just like with Ford, just like with Lincoln, just like with Cadillac, just like with Opel and Studebaker, just like with many other brands that were also existent during that era. But here in this particular era, we can at least agree that Chevrolet is probably one of the biggest, most top prime innovators in this entire century and a decade that it has been around for. But the big thing about Chevrolet itself when it comes to its models is it's gigantic, by all means. When it comes to looking back at the kind of models Chevrolet had, especially when you get down to the 1940s, when Ford had the Super Deluxe, Mercury had the Sun Valley thing, I can't really sure what that name was. And then of course you had yourself the usage of Cadillacs, Packards, Studebakers, and many others from that time. Chevrolet's share of models from the 40s, however, did not necessarily include as much as it would have in the next ensuing decade. Although, of course, you could remember such things like the Fleet line or even the pickup trucks from that particular era. But when it comes to the 50s, that was where Chevrolet started to hit a good mark by introducing models including the Corvette, the Impala, the Del Rey, and of course the Bel Air, not to mention the Biscayne and also the 3100 pickup. Chevrolet managed to grow exponentially. A lot of their models had become instant successes, with some not so necessarily getting to a point where they can become some of the best known models in the industry. Chevrolet had an amazing kick thanks to such models with unique innovations that no one had ever seen coming. The Corvette in particular, along with the Bel Air, the Impala, and the Biscayne, they were able to carry on to the next decade. The Biscayne would not necessarily get all the way up there, and same thing with the Bel Air, although it would take a few more years for the Bel Air to pretty much disappear. But for models like the Impala and Corvette, by the end of the 1960s, and it was also a time where another model had pretty much been introduced that also became an instant success, the Camaro. So the Camaro, Impala, and Corvette, those were in fact some of the biggest known models in Chevrolet's history. And they were some of the most successful, more economically well priced, and also practical and sporty and stylish in tons of different ways and different perspectives. But Chevrolet, of course, when it came down to having models out there that tried to be innovative in different ways, they were not necessarily top of the line. If I had to give out a few examples, then well, the Vega GT, the Citation, and then of course you have yourself the top end failure of all of them in the entire world, the Corvair. Yeah, the Corvair was in fact their attempt to try and outsmart the Corvette in all consistent ways, but it severely flopped. It put a huge scarring on the brand itself. But it's way more worse with the Corvair when it comes to many other models. I could be here all day talking about the history and existence of many other models in the industry that also flopped and performed very poorly in the marketplace, but in terms of how Chevrolet was able to carry on with some atrocities like that, they were able to keep a lot of their models like the Corvette, Impala, Camaro, and even some others along on the line. But as time went on, they tried to do something similar to this, and by the 80s and 90s, we had such models out there, including the Malibu, Beretta, and even have ourselves the good old hatchback, which would eventually turn out to be the Spark. Though by today's standards, here in 2021, if there are some models that I can pretty much go ahead and name off, then well, I might as well say that after such a long time, they brought back the Blazer and Trailblazer, both of which were well known throughout the 90s and 2000s, but here in more recent times, they're now back, and pretty much better than ever. And then of course you can't really go too far without also talking about the SS, the Malibu, the Impala, the Cruze, Bolt, Volt, Camaro, Silverado, Tahoe, and you even got yourself the Silverado HD, which is a much more powerful variant of the Silverado pickup that we all know and love, pretty much. But looking back at everything that Chevrolet has done, and also what we could probably expect to show up in the next ensuing decade, I kind of wouldn't want to imagine a world without Chevrolet and the many models that I myself have really come to know about, other than the ones I've already known about. I kind of wish that they would bring back some models out there and try to reintroduce some of their failures in different ways. If they could try to bring back some, like the Chevette, the Chevelle, the Citation, Beretta, Biscayne, Del Rey, and Corsica, and Lumina, then there's also a good likelihood that we might actually see something different about these models that were very hated for what they were. Otherwise, their catalog certainly is pretty big, and they are still one of the biggest in the industry, though not necessarily top of the line, in accordance with many others that I've talked about, and also ones that I will talk about in the future. But until that happens, I'm going to have lots of other things that I'm also going to be working on for the next few months. So, pretty much expect me to have a lot of other things planned out. And if you want to see more go down on my channel, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.